For weeks, I've been saying, I don't know about this one, guys. Like, I'm excited about all the other races, but this issue one thing, 20-some, 30-some million dollars, I'm not seeing the path. And Aaron said, there's a path, and he was right.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Narrative. Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, David Mahan joining you, bleary-eyed from a late night of election watching. And
what are you talking about? We're ready to go here, man.
I don't even want to know how much caffeine you have in your system today.
I'm high on life, on Florida returns and Pennsylvania returns.
Look out, everybody. This man is on 12.
It's like Christmas morning for you. Let's be honest.
Christmas morning because I'm the one waking up. That Christmas morning, my kids come into my bed to wake me up. I get to go in their bed. Did you see about Michigan? We can win this. Like, Daddy, what are you talking about?
I can actually picture that, which makes it so hilarious. Well, as we got into the office this morning and talked, we thought, you know what our audience needs? More people telling them about election results.
There's not enough people election coverage anymore, but yeah.
So we're going to toss our hat into the ring with a special election recap episode. And gentlemen, just overall thoughts on the night. I think we can sit here and say pretty good night in Ohio, at least as far as things that we've talked about repeatedly on the podcast, candidates and issues, all really broke the way that we were hoping they would.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, so many major turning points in this election. And I know we're going to go through a lot of different topics here today, but I think big picture, perseverance by the body of Christ in this. We were going into this really concerned about whether Christians would turn out to vote. I think we're still waiting to see some data back on those things, but I think overwhelmingly you're seeing positive signs in that direction, especially with the defeat of issue one. This is going to be one of the big themes of the conversation today. But I saw one report that showed over $200 million was spent by conservative candidates hammering the left over their transgender policies. That's massive. And you look at the places where conservative candidates did really well, and you can see the difference that made, right? So this was a huge night to that end. Lots of wins on the pro-life side, but also big picture. We have some real opportunities to reset the playing field in America over these next 4 years. So it is what we talked about at prayer this morning. We are going on offense and sprinting for these next 4 years straight. So yeah.
For me, it was surreal. It was just, in a word, it was surreal. This guy was attacked by the DOJ, attacked physically, shot in the head.
Yep.
Right, and there was at least two other, attempts on his life. They pulled a rug out under him in the midnight hour, and take out Grandpa Joe and put in Kamala, and then just sweeps the country.
Yeah.
Who does that? Like, this guy is a phenom. It was exciting to see. I stayed up to probably about 1:45.
Yeah, once I saw Pennsylvania, I said I'm going to bed, and then I was up again at 4, and then at 6,
Yeah.
You're like Buddy the Elf. I got a whole 45 minutes.
Exactly. What else do you need, right? That's yeah.
Well, starting at the top of the ticket, I think the manner in which former president and President-elect Trump, he's only the second president in history to serve non-consecutive terms.
First non-Ohioan to serve non, but he has an Ohioan on his ticket.
That's right. We're still in there.
It still counts.
Yeah.
It still counts. But
we in there.
It looks like he's on track for more than 300 votes in the Electoral College. Popular vote, he won by close to 5 million, it's looking like, somewhere in there. And first time a Republican candidate has won with both the popular vote and the Electoral College vote in 20 years, I think I heard last night.
Yep.
So
no, that's right. I mean, I think there's a few different things to this. I think one, the fact that he won the popular vote is so monumentally important, right? And because this isn't just now about a sort of a Republican-Democrat split, right? You're actually seeing folks care about substance in a real way more than Jersey. Because if you look at the campaign that was run by the Harris team, you'll notice a few things. One, again, they completely bypassed the democratic process, right? The Democratic Party
That's right.
completely bypassed the democratic process. And so, one, you had a candidate that wasn't just on the political side. Primaries matter because they test the candidate, they stretch them, all those types of things. And you just saw, time and time again, Kamala not being willing to go and talk to the American people, right? We'll talk more about J.D. Vance later, but I think one of the big things that you saw from this team and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance is their willingness to talk to the American people. But also, too, Kamala, I was talking about this with a friend this morning. There are Democrats and liberals, progressives that I really respect in terms of they're brilliant, they're smart, they communicate really well. I think they're dead wrong on some majorly important things. Kamala didn't really engage on substance in a lot of ways, right? And when you have people that are, the hurting is real, and you also have wars breaking out all over the place, it was really concerning to me was, I think if the left was going to be able to kind of pull this one off, right, after all of the things that they've done for the last 4 years, after all of the things Kamala did when she was Attorney General, remember, she was the AG that went after David Daleiden she was the Attorney General that went after David Daleiden when he revealed that Planned Parenthood was selling body parts. Mm-hmm. She's been one of the most radical sort of politicians in America. The fact that America so clearly and resoundingly rejected her and that ideology, I think, is a good sign. Doesn't mean that all of a sudden America's this big conservative bastion, but it does at least mean we're not going down that path, at least not yet.
Yeah, one of the things that stuck out to me probably about 3:30, and I saw this when I got up this morning, but on X, Scott Jennings made this statement on a panel with CNN. He said, "This election is something of an indictment on the political information complex. The story that was portrayed was not true. We were just ignoring the fundamentals." And all of those fundamentals that Aaron just talked about, right? Like the economy. Yeah, both sides are struggling, And so, why, even with all of that, why when she keeps getting these softball interviews where she could easily address the questions based, on the issues, she didn't.
Right.
And but they still supported her this whole time. Yeah. Everybody were fascists. Everybody that's worried about the economy are Hitlers, and we're garbage. And then we see this blowout. Yeah. And I'm really excited, guys, to see what the numbers look like of African Americans, right? To see where they right on that, and Hispanics. Like, look at Florida. Look at some of these Pennsylvania communities that had like 50% Hispanic, 40-some% Hispanic that went Trump. So it was an indictment on, like he said, the media.
Well, and I think, David, what's also important about that is, so now what does Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and these guys actually do with this, right? And I think this is where, you can't. It would be wrong to look at this and say working class voters are now they're now forever going to be with conservatives or Republicans or things like that, right? I think what's important is what they do with this, and this is why the J.D. Vance pick is one of the most crucial strategic decisions Donald Trump made in this election, right? And I know when it first came out, a lot of folks were concerned about it because they said, well, he already has Ohio. Why is he picking this young guy? J.D. Vance has had some pretty, he's a great media talker and has said some pretty audacious things that the media jumped on that I thought were pretty funny around childless cat ladies, et cetera. But what Donald Trump saw, and what we knew here in Ohio, is J.D. Vance understands what families are actually dealing with. Right. That's the thing that gets me most excited about this administration, is if we're really going to, kind of pass the American promise on to the next generation, we've got to restore families, right? And understanding, hey, open borders are a family issue. Inflation are a family issue, just as much as transgender ideology is a family issue, and abortion is a family issue, and religious freedom is a family issue. And I think what J.D. Vance really represents here is a new day of conservative leaders that are willing to sit down with anybody.
Yeah, and what a stark contrast he had, right?
Yeah.
She's flip-flopping on policies. He was consistent.
Right.
She's avoiding interviews. He's taking every interview. She stumbled over her own opinions, her
Right.
own record,
Yes.
and he was consistent.
Yeah.
And just articulate in the whole thing. And so what a contrast he represented.
Think about that vice presidential debate, right, with Tim Walz, and what's
Really a debate.
I know, right? But honestly, that was the moment I think America finally got to see JD for who he truly is. Because what's important about JD is he's not just a great communicator; he's also brilliant, right? And this is, to me, the challenge to Christians out there. You know, we focus a lot of times on how we represent our witness and all these types of things. We focus so much on, are we being winsome? Are we being, all of these types, which by all means we should, to the best of our ability, be winsome, be kind, be gentle, all those types of things. But JD really understands the issues, right? He has such a depth of knowledge so that, he can get in there and poke fun at childless cat ladies and say, no, this is why I'm actually really upset about this. Because people like Randy Weingartner, the head of the teachers union, they're saying they want to take your kids. They're not having kids. They want to go after your kids. Think about what that would practically mean. And he's got the receipts and the knowledge to be able to do that. And so, by all means, we need to be in these culture wars, but we need to be prepared to go to battle on them. And that's what you're seeing JD do.
And quite a rise for him as well. Just 2 years ago, elected to the U.S. Senate. Just last fall, he was our keynote at the March for Life across the street here, and now he's going to be the Vice President of the United States. Just from a practical procedural standpoint, Aaron, I want to ask, what happens to that Senate seat now that JD is going to be assuming the vice presidency?
So all eyes are on Mike DeWine now. It is up to him who he picks. It's got to be a Republican. But he has literally complete autonomy over choosing who this person is. I will just tell you, if you're expecting to know soon, and this is not, I've not had any specific conversation to when it will happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if we don't know until, could be after New Year's. But it is totally up to him who he picks. They will have to run for re-election in 4 years. But don't think any. Two things. One, it's not a foregone conclusion of who it's going to be in any direction. And I'll say two, just based off conversations I've had, anyone who says they know whose it's going to be is lying, right? Mike DeWine is very meticulous on these things. He's going to get a lot of inputs and make the decision there. The reality is, he's never running for re-election. He's got it's all his. Like he can go wherever he wants to with this thing. So the one thing that person we can be lobbying the most on this is the Holy Spirit for help and say, God, put a good man or woman in that spot.
Senator David Mahan, is that what
That's
we're
right,
talking
exactly.
about here?
David Mahan at CCV.
You mean David Mahan Jr., right? That's
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
The good David Mahan.
we wanted that's the.
Well, keeping our eyes on the Senate race, Bernie Moreno tops Sherrod Brown, a longtime senator and politician from the state of Ohio, and what a campaign from Bernie.
Yeah. No, well, a few things. One, I have seen for years wealthy guys. I mean, honestly, my entire 15, 16 years now working in politics, it's a normal thing to see really wealthy guys jump into big Senate races or big governor's races or things like that. It's not normal to see the really wealthy guy jump in and be the hardest worker in the race. Like Bernie was everywhere.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? I mean, he hustled his butt off sitting down with voters all over the place, right? And just think about, here's a guy with, unless you've bought a BMW in North Olmsted, you don't know who Bernie Moreno is, right? To go from that to beating, probably the most well-known politician in Ohio, right? Maybe outside of Mike DeWine. Mm-hmm. To do that shows not only one, a strong rejection of Sherrod Brown and his just frankly two-facedness, right? Like we just saw this for years, but it also is a testimony to Bernie.
Yeah, and Brown slid all his chips in on the life issue.
Oh my gosh! Right? Yes.
Like he's pro-life. He's he's hardcore on life, and thinking that was going to squash him. But it didn't.
That to me, and you guys are going to see a lot from CCV on this, right? We're doing the analysis right now, but for basically since the Dobbs case, we have been told being pro-life is a liability. Well, Bernie said he's pro-life, stands by the 15-week bill federally, stands by a federal role. Even when Donald Trump threw the issue under the bus, Bernie didn't. And Sherrod Brown attacked him mercilessly, tens of millions of dollars of ads attacking Bernie on this, and Bernie won. Now, does that mean Ohio is now pro-life all of a sudden? We should go back to the ballot tomorrow and try to repeal this thing? No. What it does mean...
You don't have to tuck tail.
Right. You don't need to tuck tail. And actually, being pro-life in many ways is a good thing to voters because it just says you have conviction, right? And what's for them, what's worse... for voters, what's worse than being pro-life is being somebody who gets tossed around by the cultural winds, right? And so for Bernie to say, this is who I am and I stand on, voters are totally fine with politicians being pro-life. And still, I will say, you cannot point to a single statewide race across the country where the politician lost because they were pro-life, right? The media and the left, and it's working in our favor because they've it's one thing when the media and the left push a false narrative. It's another thing when they start drinking their own Kool-Aid, right? So the left has actually started drinking their own Kool-Aid that attacking candidates relentlessly over the abortion issue is a good thing for them. And what the reality is and it's what we saw in issue 1. It's not that voters are radically pro-abortion, right? Like as far as the left is, it's that they just don't like the issue. They don't like to look at the issue. They don't like to talk about the issue. They don't like to think about the issue. So if you put in front of them all abortion or no abortion, they're going to say, fine, it's all abortion. Let's just stop talking about it, right? But if you put in front of them, here's everything going on in the country, like David talked about, prices, border, drugs, crime, all of that. And by the way, this guy is, he's a Christian, so he's pro-life. They're like, oh, cool. My brother is a Christian and he's pro-life. That's fine, right? It's such a major win. And again, Bernie can't get enough credit for standing by his pro-life convictions all the way through the end.
And by flipping that seat in the Senate, that was one of several races throughout the country that helped flip Senate control of the Senate to the Republicans as well. We saw our neighboring state, Joe Manchin, even though he'd gone more independent lately, he loses his seat and a couple other key ones. But Republicans are going to have control of the upper chamber as well.
Oh, they're I think Wisconsin's lost at this point. I think they're going to get Michigan. Tim Sheehy won. Tim Sheehy's a rock star in Montana. Speaking of Montana, the senator no one knows, but is the one that really saved the day is U.S. Senator Steve Daines. He's the chairman of the NRSC. He is just one of these guys who's brilliant, pro-life Christian, knows how to build coalition, knows how to work with all types of people. Doesn't want the spotlight. Isn't out there, trying to put his name out there for everything. But Steve Daines deserves a ton of credit. He's been to CCV's office before. Great friend of the cause. Really an incredible effort here. And big picture, we didn't talk about this much in this election, but Clarence Thomas is getting up there in age, right? Mm-hmm. And this getting the Senate and the presidency, and I think as we sit here right now, I think they're going to hold Congress, but the House, but that alone is huge.
Well, before we pivot off of abortion, are we seeing a pendulum swing? Right, we had the amendment in Florida, we had Nebraska, who had a unique strategy on this life amendment stuff. But what do you think about those?
Yeah, so big picture, stepping back on the abortion amendment stuff. So 10 states had abortion amendments this time around. 5 of them were hard left states, right? They were codifying existing abortion on demand laws, those types of things. 5 others were one was a very conservative state in South Dakota. They buried that thing pretty strongly, which is huge. Missouri and Arizona, unfortunately, they both lost pretty significantly. Arizona was a case where they got outspent like $30 million to less than $2 million.
Wow.
I mean, it was just, obviously you guys know I've got dear friends there who were a part of that campaign, and, they laid it all out on the line. But it's just was a hard season to fight for it. And, again, this is lots of things swirling around in my mind on this. They passed a 15-week bill in Florida, in Arizona, about a year ago to try to fight off this thing, and it didn't work. And I'm not saying that was the wrong thing to do, right? But it's just another piece of data as we're trying to figure out strategically what do we do to try to save life. But that's
good news. Give me some good news.
Good news.
Come
Sorry,
on.
so let's go to the good news.
Man.
Right, so
Get me out of here.
So, first off, Nebraska, and shout out to Karen Bowling at the Nebraska Family Alliance, and really the David Mahan effect for.
I was going to say future employer of David Mahan.
Exactly.
You're welcome.
Friends of the podcast will remember when we shipped David off to Nebraska, I think last January, to go talk with them and their governor about what we learned here in Ohio, right? And they actually there were 2 ballot measures there, and they beat the abortion up to birth one, right? And that's a really, really big deal. And then the big headline out of all of this is Florida. And Florida, literally, it was like $118 million the left spent. I mean, just think about that for a moment.
Unimaginable for a ballot in this.
What other issue? Like gambling. The casinos I couldn't see spending $118 million.
Cartel money.
Like this is $118 million to be able to kill kids. If you don't see the world through a spiritual lens, like it doesn't make sense, right? Like what in the world? Why would you spend this much money on again, even if you were to take out the actual taking of a life in it, right?
Right.
If we were to say a medical procedure that like 1% of your population may want to use at some point, like think of anything else that you'd spend $118 million on.
Wow.
That's insane.
It's important to somebody. And
It's important to somebody.
It should be important to the church too.
Right. And that's somebody's Moloch, right? I mean, it's I can't get my. So anyway, they did that.
Good news.
Good news.
Good news.
Ron DeSantis, they raised about $20 million there, and Ron DeSantis and Casey DeSantis and their folks in Florida ran a great campaign, and they beat it. So I mean, that really is that's a page turn, just a very important sort of marker in the sand for the pro-life movement. I do want to say though, if you actually go look at the votes in Florida and you compare it to Ohio, by percentage, we got more votes in Ohio against the abortion amendment than they did in Florida.
Think about that. Wow.
Right? I mean, I got these numbers here. Let me pull them up so I can give them to you exactly. In Ohio, we had 56.78 votes for it, 56.78. In Florida, they had 57.1 votes for it, right? Now, the difference is Florida has a 60% threshold, right? And
it's harder to buy a ballot initiative in Florida.
It's harder to buy a ballot initiative. It's harder to amend your state's founding document.
That's right.
Right? That's the, honestly, guys, we got a lot of flack, even from some friends, when we said we need to do 60%. But we saw the polling and we knew the abortion amendment with where the culture is and where the media is and all that kind of stuff. We were going to have a really difficult time beating it at 50%. At 60%, we felt really good that we could beat it. And again, that was the beauty of 60% was it wasn't something we were just going to do for the abortion amendment. It was something that was just good government, right?
Right.
It was something.
All the opposition to the 60% ballot, measure.
Yeah.
All of them require in their boards,
Right.
60% or more to amend their documents, their constitution.
Right.
It's just good governance.
Our U.S. Constitution requires 2/3, right? I mean, it's unbelievable. And again, this is where leadership in Florida matters in terms of having putting yourself in position to thrive, big picture. And also why, I got to say, there are certain folks, I'm going to be like subtweeting people here, but this is an important conversation. There's some people that don't speak out on certain political issues if they're not overtly moral, right? So they will speak out on an abortion amendment. It's very clearly a moral issue, but they won't speak out on a procedural thing, like the redistricting amendment or like 60%, right? But everything is moral, right? Process is moral. Having good process in place safeguards liberty, safeguards well-being, right? These things, we can't all of a sudden say that God, there's so much in Scripture on wisdom, right? We're reading through Psalms or through Proverbs right now as a staff. When we're doing our morning prayer, we do a Psalm or a proverb right now a day, and it's not an accident that God wrote so much. The Holy Spirit inspired so much on wisdom because He's like, I'm not going to just give you a playbook of rules.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a Holy Spirit that will give you wisdom.
The greatest measure of wisdom He ever poured out was for the purpose for Solomon to govern.
Yes.
Being able to discern right from wrong, good from evil.
Yes.
That's government, the ordering of society based on somebody's standard of good and evil.
Yep. And so, why do all of these people want to come into our country, right? It's not because we have the best laws, right? Actually, you look at a lot of their other countries, they got a ton of laws. They got a lot more laws than we do, right? It's that we have a process, right? That checks power, that checks government, that ensures the most liberty. Like those things matter so much. So Christians, we can't just say, well, listen, if it ain't gay marriage, we're not talking about it. We got to be involved in all of these different aspects.
Yeah, and issue 1, you mentioned that was another big win as well, as that was defeated. But as you were talking, Aaron, it made me think is with the 60% piece, that also could have deterred these ballot issues from coming back again and again and again. So I doubt that we've heard the last of this gerrymandering issue. But for the day, we can celebrate that.
So I'm going to go ahead and say this, Mike.
Here we go. I teed him up.
All right.
He was wrong.
I was wrong.
Wait, we're recording.
We need to clip that.
Yes.
It just needs to be the intro quote for the show today.
I need a new ringtone.
I was wrong. For weeks, I've been saying, I don't know about this one, guys. Like, I'm excited about all the other races, but this issue 1 thing, 20-some, 30-some million dollars, I'm not seeing the path. And Aaron said, there's a path, and he was right.
See that's
wow. Not only were you wrong, but you just admitted
I was right.
This is
man.
This is a
That's
banner
Trying to
day.
demonstrate the kind of man I am.
Really a great
I admit
day.
when I'm wrong.
Yeah. No, honestly, I feel like I have to start here of Senate President Matt Huffman, Senate Majority Leader Rob McCauley, Bob Paduchik, former Ohio GOP chair, Bob Paduchik, who ran the campaign, even Colton Henson, who worked on that campaign. They ran a brilliant campaign against this constitutional amendment. Really, I think by the end of it, it's probably going to be 5-1. They got outspent. We got outspent on this thing, right? So $40 million on the other side, $8 million, less than $8 million on our side. But then the other thing about this, 2 other things. One, also want to give credit to Frank LaRose, Secretary of State Frank LaRose, who wrote incredible ballot language that was honest about what this thing was. But also, to church, I want to, as we're all complimenting, I want to compliment David, Chris Lightfoot, Ruth Edmonds, Robert Kylo. I mean, the CCV team. You know, when you're outspent that much, right? You have to rely on grassroots. You have to rely on getting into non-traditional political spaces and educating voters and turning them out. And that's what CCV did, right? Getting into churches, putting the No on Issue 1 stuff. Comms team did a phenomenal job of putting together some simple, practical resources on what Issue 1 was. On this podcast, we had a great conversation on what Issue 1 was. With Senator McCauley. And so that's huge. I think big picture, there's a few things this thing does. One, you know, this puts to bed this ridiculous redistricting idea that was really dangerous. But beyond that, it sends such a good message that it's not a slam dunk if you just bring tens of millions of dollars to Ohio to change our Constitution, especially on these procedural things. You know, I was actually laughing. I went, you know, we want you to vote early. Do as I say, not as I do, though. I voted on Election Day. I'm sorry. My polling place is right by my house. I love walking over there. But keep voting early as long as we have it. Anyway, but I walked in and unintentionally, like, it was the best No on Issue 1 ad I saw, because, you know, they have to tape up on the walls all of these different disclaimers and notices and things like that. And there was this huge 4x6.
It was massive. I saw people, well, not at mine because I voted early, but I did see people posting on Facebook and social media yesterday what that actually looked like.
Yeah, what the actual constitutional amendment was, right? And so, you know, you see the only big letters are on it, a constitutional amendment, an amendment to the Ohio Constitution, and then just 12-point font of just...
On the machine, I'm scrolling. Like, I had to hit scroll like 5 times on the machine.
And so voters, thankfully, were like, okay, this is too crazy. So that in and of itself, too, a really positive sign. And puts us in great position to, you know, the fact that this is behind us, we can really press forward. But at some point, we're going to have to address how easy it is to attack our state constitution.
And I think specific to Issue 1 as well, it kind of forced us to talk about the current process in a way that made it very digestible for a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
And hopefully that helped them understand what the current process and realize that it is overall pretty fair.
Right. Oh, I mean, that was the thing to me that really jumped out to me on all of this was that what we have right now, there is no perfect system as long as we live in a fallen world, right? Until we can all just fall on our knees before a king. There is no perfect system, but actually what we have right now is pretty good.
You can't have power to the people by taking away, right, the voice of their elected officials.
Amen.
That's the only way we have power.
Yep.
Another way we're seeing power benefit good common sense and interpreting laws is through the Supreme Court race. Yeah. And all 3 Republican justices performed very well there in Ohio. And that, specific to CCV's work and bills across the street at the State House, it's going to be so huge as a number of challenges come up to abortion bills that we try and pass to limit and restrain that evil, and House Bill 68 as it goes through the process and all those things. Very, very good news for CCV and Ohio last night there too.
Huge. So I mean, what we have right now is a 6-1, what I would say a 6-1 originalist majority, right? So you have judges on the Ohio Supreme Court that are going to interpret the law, not try to force their political agenda through it. But you've heard us talk about this on the podcast, but just a quick review. The teachers' unions are suing to repeal the entire voucher program. They are suing, ACLU is suing to repeal the bill to stop trans medicine on kids, House Bill 68, and the Save Women's Sports bill, all in the House Bill 68. There's lawsuits to repeal the requirements that women have ultrasounds before abortions, that we can regulate the abortion pill, that women be given informed consent before an abortion. Like, the entire leftist political agenda is in the state courts right now. And we're not going to take anything for granted. We got to still have an attorney general, and which we do. and Dave Yost, and but we still have to make good arguments and fight the case out and all that kind of stuff. Don't want to take anything for granted. But yeah, I mean, that is where we can be right now. Is we have 3 branches of government in Ohio that are going to safeguard liberty and kids, and that's a big deal.
I was encouraged by the fact that usually a lot of folks just don't vote for the justices. Yeah. But I was watching them all night, and they were out front from the beginning, all 3 of them. And so folks came out real big for them, and that was encouraging to me moving forward.
And the last thing we need to touch on is the General Assembly races. We had, 11 state senators that were on the ballot, and then all the state representatives. So just broadly, what does that look like for us with a new General Assembly starting in January?
Shout out to Rep. Williams, Rep. Bros. Shout out to Salvo, Jody Salvo up north. And, we've got 2 pastors now, 2 more pastors.
Yeah, Jonathan Newman.
Yeah, and Mullins down in southern Ohio. And so they joined Rep. Click. In the House.
Have the pastor caucus.
As pastors, yeah. So be encouraged by that, family.
Yeah, again, I think big picture there, it's a 65-34 majority, Republican supermajority in the House, a 24-9 Republican supermajority in the Senate. We're going to be coming up on a really interesting Speaker of the House vote in a few weeks for next year. But all told, it's what we talked about this morning, kind of kicked off the podcast with that. Like, this is time to go on offense now, right? And what we need to have is a clear vision for the direction forward. And that's what CCV is going to be bringing to the table, because why I'm most excited about this election result is Ohio has real problems, and we are now in a place with leaders to actually do something about it. Right, both at the federal government and at the state government, and it's going to take local leaders to work in partnership with them to address them. Right, what we're seeing in education, right, with not just the indoctrination of kids, but really the failures of the educational environment. What we're seeing with the breakdown of family, right, and how that's contributing to our population shrinking, contributing to crime and drug use and all types of just awful things, outcomes for human beings made in the image of God. And so what we need to do now, it's not just about winning elections, it's about then using that opportunity to put America and put our state in its position to have as many people thrive as possible.
And certainly we'll have more discussions of that coming up on The Narrative. And if I'm not mistaken, we covered everything we needed to from the election yesterday. Have I missed anything, guys?
I don't know, Dave. Did you anything?
Wait, somebody wake David up.
Yeah, that's.
I think I told everybody I was wrong, and apparently that was the high point of the entire podcast. So I think I'm good.
Entire year. What are you talking about?
Yeah, does anybody want to say I was right about anything? I would take that.
Would not like to say that.
Okay, I pushed it too far. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in to the podcast today. I hope this was helpful and encouraging to you. We're grateful that you've listened in, that you've hopefully encouraged people to vote and share the resources that we produce for this election. And we'll be talking to you the next couple of weeks about more transition things toward January and all the lame duck stuff that David's going to be doing across the street. It's going to be a busy few weeks here in Ohio until we get to the start of the new year. What you guys are like passing notes in class.
This is my favorite part of today, and I'm not going to say what this is and who sent this to me, but please, if you have funny memes on the day, keep them coming my way over text, because that's making the day.
It's just childish, and we're not going to make mention of that.
Walk in a manner that's worthy of your calling, Aaron Baer. That is all I have to say to you. And we're going to end it right there. Hope you all have a great day and week. Thanks so much for joining us on The Narrative. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.